Navigating relationships, particularly with toxic individuals, can be a daunting and challenging task. Toxicity in people can manifest in a variety of ways: manipulation, deceit, emotional abuse, or outright disregard for another person's well-being. When confronted with such behavior, it is easy to feel trapped or overwhelmed, unsure of how to protect oneself, while still striving to maintain some semblance of a peaceful and functional relationship. However, there are methods and strategies to outsmart and regain control over the situation. Understanding how to deal with toxic individuals is a skill that requires insight, awareness, and a level of self-confidence. In this discourse, we will explore 7 tactical approaches that can help someone deal with toxic men, protect their mental and emotional health, and ultimately regain agency. The first tactic to recognize when dealing with a toxic man is understanding the value of emotional distance. Emotional distance does not mean becoming cold-hearted or indifferent, but instead, learning how to detach emotionally from the toxic behaviors that are being directed at you. A toxic person often uses emotional manipulation to control others, whether through guilt-tripping, gaslighting, or playing the victim. This is particularly damaging because it creates a cycle of emotional dependency that can make you feel guilty for not catering to their needs or demands. The first step in breaking this cycle is learning how to maintain a healthy distance from their emotional drama. By mentally separating yourself from their manipulative actions, you are less likely to be drawn into their web of control. Acknowledge that their emotional responses are not a reflection of your worth or actions, but rather a manifestation of their own issues. This detachment is not just about ignoring the person, it is about recognizing that their emotions are theirs to own, not yours to fix. Secondly, it is critical to recognize and set boundaries with a toxic man. Boundaries are vital in maintaining your own mental and emotional well-being. Toxic individuals often test limits and push boundaries as a way of asserting dominance or control. Establishing clear boundaries with them sends a message that you will not tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or mistreatment. Boundaries should be firm and unambiguous. There should be no room for negotiation or manipulation. For instance, if the person consistently belittles you or insults you, make it clear that this behavior is unacceptable and that you will not engage with them if it continues. This can be difficult, especially if the person in question has a tendency to emotionally blackmail or guilt-trip you into compliance. It is important to remember that setting boundaries is not an act of aggression. It is an assertion of your right to be treated with respect and dignity. If the toxic person violates your boundaries, enforce consequences. The key is to stay consistent. Toxic individuals thrive on inconsistency because it allows them to manipulate the situation to their advantage. Another effective tactic in dealing with a toxic man is learning to recognize and disarm their manipulation tactics. Toxic individuals often rely on manipulation to get what they want, whether it's through guilt-tripping, gaslighting, or exploiting your vulnerabilities. The ability to recognize these tactics is essential for maintaining control of the situation. One common manipulation tactic is gaslighting, where the toxic person distorts the truth and makes you question your own reality or perception. This can be incredibly confusing and unsettling, especially when it is subtle and persistent. The key to overcoming gaslighting is to trust your own judgment and intuition. Keep a record of events if necessary, and refer to it when the toxic person tries to distort the truth. Another common tactic is guilt-tripping, where the individual makes you feel responsible for their actions or emotions. When faced with guilt-tripping, it is essential to recognize that you are not responsible for their feelings or behavior. Remind yourself that you are allowed to prioritize your own well-being and refuse to be manipulated into feeling guilty. The foundation of outsmarting a toxic individual lies in recognizing the importance of emotional distance and setting clear, firm boundaries. Emotional distance protects you from manipulation, while boundaries assert your right to be treated with respect, allowing you to disengage from toxic behavior without feeling guilty or responsible for their emotions. Recognizing and disarming manipulation tactics such as gaslighting or guilt-tripping requires self-awareness and confidence. Trust your gut instincts to identify toxic patterns early and avoid allowing them to control your emotional state. Maintaining awareness helps you reclaim control and safeguard your well-being. In every interaction, the ability to establish emotional distance and set healthy boundaries is one of the most critical strategies to deal with toxic individuals. When interacting with toxic people, especially those who manipulate, belittle, or undermine your sense of self, it is all too easy to lose your sense of personal strength and become engulfed in their negative emotional energy. These individuals have a remarkable ability to draw you into their drama, often making you feel like you are responsible for their emotions or actions. To protect yourself, it is imperative to learn how to maintain an emotional distance and clearly define your boundaries, both for your mental and emotional health. These are not just theoretical concepts. They are practical tools that you can implement in everyday life. Emotional distance is essentially the art of disengaging from the toxic emotional currents that a person seeks to create. When a toxic person tries to manipulate your emotions, they may use tactics like guilt tripping, playing the victim, or creating chaos. These strategies are designed to get an emotional reaction from you, to destabilize your sense of self, or to manipulate you into doing something that benefits them. The purpose of emotional distance is not to shut down your feelings, but rather to recognize that your emotions are your responsibility and are not to be dictated by someone else's toxic behavior. One of the first steps in establishing emotional distance is to recognize when you are being drawn into the toxic individual's web. Toxic people often use tactics such as guilt, shame, or emotional blackmail to control and manipulate. For example, a toxic man might say, "If you really cared about me, you would do this," or "You're the only one who can make me happy." These statements are designed to create an emotional pull on you, often making you feel as though you are responsible for their well-being or happiness. It is critical to recognize these manipulative tactics for what they are: attempts to get you emotionally involved and invested in their needs, often at the expense of your own well-being. When you recognize these attempts, it becomes much easier to emotionally detach and refuse to be drawn into the emotional turmoil that they are trying to create. Emotional distance doesn't mean that you become cold or indifferent, but rather that you learn how to detach from the emotional entanglements that the toxic individual is trying to provoke. When a toxic person uses manipulation or emotional games, you do not need to engage with them in a way that diminishes your own emotional well-being. For example, when confronted with guilt tripping, you can recognize it for what it is and resist the urge to apologize or over-explain yourself. Instead, you can calmly and firmly state that you are not responsible for their emotions and that you have the right to prioritize your own needs. Practicing emotional distance allows you to protect your inner peace and to avoid being dragged into endless cycles of conflict and emotional turmoil. Setting clear boundaries is another crucial tactic for maintaining emotional distance. Boundaries serve as a framework that defines what is acceptable behavior and what is not. Toxic individuals often test or violate boundaries in an effort to manipulate or control others. Without clear boundaries, it becomes far more difficult to assert your needs and protect your sense of self. Setting boundaries with a toxic man, for example, might involve drawing a clear line when it comes to disrespectful behavior, such as belittling or insulting comments. You might say, "I won't tolerate being spoken to like that." Or, "If you continue to speak to me in that way, I will leave the conversation." This communicates to the toxic individual that you have limits and that their behavior is not acceptable. However, boundaries are not always as simple as making a statement or issuing a command. Setting boundaries requires consistency and follow-through. Toxic individuals often test boundaries to see if they can push past them, and if you are not consistent, they may find ways to exploit the situation. For instance, if a toxic person tries to guilt trip you into doing something you don't want to do and you give in, it may embolden them to push further in the future. Setting boundaries requires you to remain firm, even when it feels uncomfortable. You must be prepared to enforce your boundaries without feeling guilty or apologetic for doing so. This can be incredibly difficult, particularly if the toxic person is someone you care about or if they have a tendency to manipulate your emotions. Yet when you set and maintain boundaries, you are not only protecting your mental and emotional health, but also teaching the toxic person that their behavior is not acceptable and will not be tolerated. When establishing emotional distance and boundaries, it's important to recognize that not everyone will respect them, especially toxic individuals. This can be particularly painful when the toxic individual is a close friend, family member, or romantic partner. However, it is essential to understand that your boundaries are not about punishing or rejecting the other person. They are about ensuring that you are treated with dignity and respect. Toxic individuals, particularly those who rely on manipulation and control, may resist your boundaries or try to push past them. In such cases, it is crucial to remain firm and consistent in enforcing them. This might mean walking away from a conversation, ending a relationship, or limiting the amount of time you spend with the individual. It can be difficult to make these decisions, especially when the toxic person tries to make you feel guilty for asserting your needs. But remember that your well-being must come first. Establishing emotional distance also requires you to cultivate a sense of self-awareness. This involves understanding your own emotional triggers and recognizing when you are being manipulated or pulled into a toxic interaction. Self-awareness helps you to stay grounded and to avoid reacting impulsively to the toxic individual's behavior. When you are self-aware, you are able to step back from a situation and assess it from a more objective perspective. This allows you to recognize when someone is trying to control you through emotional manipulation and gives you the clarity to distance yourself from their toxic behavior. Another important aspect of maintaining emotional distance is to learn how to respond rather than react. Toxic individuals often seek to provoke a reaction from you, and if you respond emotionally, you play into their hands. When you respond instead of reacting, you take control of the situation and maintain your emotional autonomy. This means pausing before speaking or acting in order to assess the situation and determine the best course of action. For example, if a toxic individual insults you rather than immediately reacting with anger or hurt, you might take a moment to breathe and decide to respond with calmness and assertiveness, such as, "I don't appreciate being spoken to in that way." This approach is empowering, as it puts you in control of your emotions and actions. Moreover, emotional distance doesn't mean you have to shut down or cut off the person entirely, although sometimes that may be necessary for your own well-being. It simply means that you can remain compassionate without becoming emotionally enmeshed. For instance, if the toxic person is upset or angry, you can acknowledge their feelings without taking responsibility for them. You can say something like, "I see that you are upset, but I'm not responsible for how you're feeling right now." This response helps you remain without taking on their emotional burden. By doing so, you create space for them to deal with their emotions without feeling the need to absorb or fix their issues. To build emotional distance effectively, it is also essential to practice self-care. Toxic individuals can drain your energy and leave you feeling emotionally exhausted. When you take time to care for yourself, you recharge your emotional batteries, making it easier to maintain your boundaries and emotional distance. Self-care can take many forms, from physical activities like exercise and healthy eating to emotional practices like journaling or meditation. Engaging in activities that nourish your mind and body allows you to stay grounded and confident, which strengthens your ability to maintain emotional distance from toxic individuals. Additionally, setting boundaries often means recognizing when a relationship is no longer serving you. There may be times when, despite your best efforts, a toxic relationship is beyond repair, and continuing to engage with the person only brings more harm than good. In these situations, emotional distance and boundaries may require you to walk away from the relationship entirely. This can be one of the most difficult decisions to make, especially if the person is someone you care about or if you feel a sense of obligation to them. However, it is important to remember that you have the right to protect your own well-being, even if it means letting go of toxic relationships. Walking away is not a failure, it is an act of self-preservation. Emotional distance and boundaries are not just about limiting someone else's access to your emotions or energy. They are about creating space for you to exist without being controlled, manipulated, or diminished. The more you practice these strategies, the more empowered you become in your interactions with toxic individuals. While it may take time to master, learning how to establish emotional distance and boundaries is an invaluable skill that allows you to protect your sense of self, maintain your emotional health, and engage with others on your own terms. Trusting your instincts and recognizing manipulation are two of the most powerful tools at your disposal when dealing with toxic individuals. Toxic people often rely on subtle tactics to undermine your confidence, distort reality, and control your behavior. These manipulative behaviors can be difficult to identify, particularly if the person is skilled at deception or operates under the guise of charm, care, or concern. Recognizing these tactics requires a deep connection to your inner self and the ability to see through the emotional fog that manipulative individuals often create. Trusting your instincts in these situations doesn't just involve listening to your gut feelings, it's about honing your ability to perceive the true nature of a situation and take action to protect yourself from harm. First, it's crucial to understand the role that your instincts play in protecting you. Your instincts are often the product of years of lived experience and emotional intelligence. They are a kind of internal alarm system that alerts you when something feels off or when someone is trying to take advantage of you. When a toxic person begins to manipulate you, whether consciously or unconsciously, your instincts will often provide subtle cues that something is not right. These cues can manifest as a feeling of discomfort, confusion, or unease that may not always be easy to explain at first, but they are your body's way of signaling that something needs to be addressed. It's easy to ignore these feelings, especially in moments of emotional turmoil, or when a manipulative person is particularly skilled at making you doubt yourself. But the more you learn to trust these instincts, the better equipped you'll be to spot manipulation and protect yourself. A fundamental aspect of trusting your instincts involves cultivating self-awareness. To truly trust your gut feelings, you need to be in tune with your emotions, thoughts, and physical sensations. Often, people are so accustomed to the chaos created by toxic relationships that they become desensitized to the warning signals their body sends. A person may feel a sense of dread or discomfort when interacting with a toxic individual, yet ignore it, chalking it up to their own overthinking or exaggeration. To trust your instincts, you must first be able to differentiate between valid emotional cues and anxiety-driven responses. Being self-aware helps you distinguish between true threats to your emotional well-being and the normal fluctuations of life. When you begin to trust that your feelings and reactions are important, you can begin to act on them with greater confidence. Whether that means distancing yourself from a toxic person or confronting them directly. Recognizing manipulation, however, is not always as simple as listening to your gut. It requires the ability to identify specific behaviors that toxic people use to control or deceive. Manipulation can take many forms, and it often starts small, making it easy to overlook or dismiss. Over time, however, the cumulative effect of manipulation can be devastating, eroding your confidence, self-worth, and autonomy. Manipulative individuals often use tactics such as gaslighting, guilt-tripping, love bombing, and shifting blame, all of which are designed to disorient and confuse you, making you question your reality. And, eventually, your own perceptions. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious forms of manipulation. It involves a toxic individual deliberately distorting the truth or denying events in an effort to make you doubt your memory, perception, or sanity. For example, if you bring up a behavior they exhibited in the past, a manipulative person might say, "You're remembering it wrong," or "That never happened." Over time, these small, seemingly harmless denials can erode your confidence and cause you to question your own understanding of events. Gaslighting is incredibly effective because it plays on the natural human tendency to doubt oneself, particularly when faced with an authority figure or someone you trust. But if you start to trust your instincts and pay attention to how you feel during and after these interactions, you will begin to notice the dissonance between what is happening and what the toxic person is saying. If something doesn't sit right with you, trust that instinct and examine the situation more closely. Another common manipulation tactic is guilt tripping. Toxic individuals are often experts at making you feel responsible for their emotions or actions, even when you have done nothing wrong. They might say things like, "If you really cared about me, you would do this for me," or "I've sacrificed so much for you, and this is how you repay me." The goal of guilt tripping is to make you feel like you are at fault for their negative feelings, forcing you to act out of obligation or fear of disappointing them. Over time, this tactic can make you feel as though your worth is tied to your ability to meet their needs, leading you to ignore your own desires and well-being. The key to recognizing guilt tripping is to separate the toxic person's emotions from your own. Their feelings are their responsibility, not yours. If they are trying to manipulate you by playing on your sense of guilt, trust that this is an unhealthy dynamic and protect yourself by setting boundaries. Love bombing is another form of manipulation that toxic individuals often use to gain control over you. It typically occurs early in a relationship where the manipulative person showers you with excessive praise, affection, or attention, making you feel special, adored, and wanted. This overwhelming affection can be confusing, especially when it seems to come from nowhere. The goal of love bombing is to create an emotional bond quickly, so that you become dependent on their approval and affection. Once they have established this emotional connection, they may begin to withdraw or use it as leverage to control your behavior. If you feel that someone is showering you with excessive affection or attention in an attempt to manipulate you into a vulnerable position, your instincts may be alerting you to the fact that their motives are not entirely pure. Trusting your gut can help you see through the veneer of love and identify the manipulation behind it. Shifting blame is another tactic often employed by toxic individuals. Rather than taking responsibility for their actions, they may deflect blame onto others, including you. For example, a toxic person might say, "I wouldn't have yelled at you if you hadn't made me so angry." Or, "If you were a better partner, I wouldn't need to act this way." The goal is to make you feel responsible for their behavior, often by positioning you as the cause of their emotions or actions. Over time, this creates a sense of guilt and self-doubt, making you feel like you are always at fault. Recognizing shifting blame requires a strong sense of self and the ability to hold others accountable for their actions, regardless of the emotional pressure they try to place on you. If someone consistently refuses to take responsibility for their own behavior and instead blames you, it is a red flag that manipulation is at play. Trusting your instincts also involves listening to how you feel in the presence of a toxic individual. Manipulative people often use subtle cues such as making you feel inadequate, creating confusion, or triggering anxiety to keep you on edge and dependent on their validation. If you find yourself constantly second-guessing your decisions or feeling drained after an interaction, these are signs that something is wrong. Your instincts will alert you to these emotional shifts, and it is important to heed them. This may mean stepping back from the person, taking time to reflect on the interaction, and evaluating whether their behavior aligns with your values and boundaries. Recognizing manipulation and trusting your instincts also requires a willingness to prioritize your own well-being. Often, toxic individuals will try to make you feel like you are selfish or unreasonable for putting your needs first. They may try to convince you that you owe them more of your time, energy, or attention. But when you trust your instincts, you realize that self-preservation is not selfish, it is necessary. Manipulative people often rely on your empathy and desire to help to further their own agenda. However, it is crucial to remember that you cannot pour from an empty cup. Your instincts will guide you to recognize when you need to take a step back and focus on your own needs, especially if you are being drained or exploited. Learning to trust your instincts and recognize manipulation is a gradual process, one that requires patience, self-awareness, and a commitment to protecting your emotional well-being. It involves listening to your gut, being mindful of the behaviors and tactics employed by toxic individuals, and making choices that align with your values and boundaries. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes to spot manipulation early on and take action before it undermines your sense of self. In the end, trusting your instincts empowers you to stand firm against manipulation, to protect your mental and emotional health, and to navigate relationships with greater clarity and confidence. A fourth tactic that can be incredibly effective in outsmarting a toxic man is maintaining a sense of self-awareness and confidence. Toxic individuals often prey on the insecurities of others, using them as leverage to manipulate or control. When you are self-aware and confident in your own sense of identity and worth, you become less vulnerable to their tactics. This means working on building a strong sense of self-esteem and emotional resilience. It is important to recognize and acknowledge your own strengths, values, and boundaries. When you have a clear sense of who you are less likely to allow toxic individuals to define or diminish you. Cultivating confidence can also involve practicing self-care, engaging in activities that reinforce your sense of self-worth, and surrounding yourself with supportive, healthy relationships. Toxic individuals often thrive in environments where others are isolated, insecure, or lacking in self-assurance. By fostering a strong sense of self, you can counteract their influence. Another powerful tactic is to confront the toxic individual directly and calmly when necessary. Confrontation, when done assertively and without aggression, can be an effective way to address toxic behavior. This is not about starting a fight or arguing, but rather about standing up for yourself and making it clear that you will not tolerate certain behaviors. When confronting a toxic man, it is important to stay calm, composed, and factual. Avoid being drawn into an emotional exchange, as this will only play into their hands. Present your feelings and observations in a non-confrontational way. For example, you could say, "I feel uncomfortable when you speak to me like that." Or, "When you act in that way, it makes it difficult for me to trust you." By calmly addressing the issue, you demonstrate that you are not afraid to stand up for yourself and that you expect to be treated with respect. One of the most powerful tactics to outsmart a toxic individual is to practice the art of detachment. This is not detachment in the sense of completely cutting the person out of your life, unless necessary, but detaching from their manipulative tactics and emotional demands. A toxic person often seeks to dominate the emotional landscape of a relationship, using their behavior to draw attention to themselves or make others feel responsible for their feelings. By practicing detachment, you maintain emotional control and protect yourself from being drawn into their chaos. This means not reacting to their provocations, insults, or attempts to manipulate. Instead, respond with neutrality or disengage altogether. When you practice detachment, you are asserting that you will not allow their toxic behavior to affect your emotional state or well-being. Lastly, one of the most effective strategies in dealing with a toxic man is learning to trust your instincts. Our intuition is often more powerful than we give it credit for, and when it comes to toxic individuals, our gut feeling can serve as an important guide. If something feels off or you sense that the person is manipulating or taking advantage of you, trust that feeling and take steps to protect yourself. Toxic individuals often disguise their true intentions behind a facade of charm, kindness, or charisma. This can make it difficult to recognize their behavior initially. However, by learning to trust your instincts and listening to your inner voice, you can more easily identify toxic traits early on and take action to protect yourself before the situation escalates. Your instincts are a tool that can help you recognize patterns of behavior and avoid falling into toxic dynamics. Dealing with toxic people is never easy, and it can often feel like a never-ending battle. However, by employing these tactics, emotional distance, boundary setting, recognizing manipulation, self-awareness, confrontation, detachment, and trust in your instincts, you can regain control over the situation and protect your mental and emotional well-being. Each tactic empowers you to navigate difficult interactions with a sense of clarity and confidence. The process of outsmarting a toxic individual requires patience, persistence, and a commitment to maintaining your own sense of self-respect and dignity. It is not about changing the toxic individual, but rather about learning how to protect yourself from their harmful behaviors and ensuring that you do not lose yourself in the process. Through these strategies, you can reclaim your power, your peace, and your ability to live a life that is not defined or dictated by the toxicity of others.